Hello everybody, welcome back to English Champion. Most of the teaching discussion I see, or the materials I see that teachers create, are some combination of this is a bad idea, this is not going to work.
What a bad idea.
Oh, I can't not look at it.
Or it's, doesn't everybody already know this?
That is brand new information.
You already know, don't you?
A little bit.
And so it can be very frustrating for someone who's been doing this a very long time when you see teachers with what they think are new ideas or they think are exciting ideas, and it's just, no, that's just not the right way to do that. There's also a lot of what I see posted are things that are just pointless and make the rest of the world look at us as teachers and go, yeah, that's why we don't pay you very much. Yeah, that's why you're not as respected as doctors and lawyers and engineers. We're not taking you seriously. So here's just a quick example of this. Or this was just the other day. I decided to throw my students a surprise 90s cartoons and breakfast cereal party. We chatted, ate the cereal my parents never bought me, and watched some of my favorite cartoons from when I was 10 to 11 years old. Such a great way to start their final Friday as fifth graders. Like, they're at school. If I was the parent of this kid and they came home and said, today we watched cartoons and ate cereal in class, I would have thought, who is this teacher that's wasting my kid's time? Why aren't you working on math and science and reading? This stuff drives me crazy. And then we wonder again, boy, why don't teachers get paid very much? Why are teachers not very respected? Yeah, this is why. We have lots of bad ideas, and some of the time we're just wasting time because we want to be the cool teacher. We want to have fun in class. And like, what's the point of all this? There's no learning happening here. And so I've started noticing this a lot. And this really came about the other day when I saw a post about turn and talk, all right, which is a technique for, getting kids engaged so they're participating in the lesson. And so everyone is, very high on it. It's a very trendy thing. And it's like, I don't understand the fascination with it. And here's why. I actually replied to a post about it. I said, I'm so glad turn and talk was not really a thing when I was a kid in the 80s and 90s. It would have made me hate school. As a smart kid, I had zero interest in what the nose-picking kid next to me, who hadn't even been paying attention to the teacher or doing the assigned reading, had to say. If you want to create opportunities for discussion in class, there are much better techniques. So when I was a kid and a teacher would have said, hey, turn to your neighbor and have a discussion about this, I would have thought, you're the teacher. If there's something you want me to know, you tell me. Because I don't care what this kid has to say. I'm way smarter than him. So why would I be listening to him? And if he hasn't learned it yet, if I have learned it, why would I need him to talk to me about it? And if he hasn't learned it yet, well, that's your job. You're the teacher. You explain it to him. It's not my job to share my ideas with him. So even as an 8-year-old, that's what I would have been thinking. So, I was a good boy. I did all my work. I never argued or talked back. I never got in trouble because in my house, the rule was if you get in trouble at school, it's going to be 10 times worse when you get home. So I never, ever got in trouble. And I was always very dutiful and studious, and I did whatever the teacher wanted. And I was a very good reader and very smart and did all like advanced stuff. And so I had no inclination to listen to some other kid in my class who probably wasn't as smart as I am. And I felt like it was a waste of time. Like, what are we doing? If you have to teach me something, teach me. If you want us to discuss this, if you want to ask me a question, okay, you can ask me and I'll answer it for you. But like, why am I asking him? This doesn't make any sense. And so, I was kind of raised and became part of the system, I guess, that many people don't like. But it was, this isn't a place for having fun and learning from my classmates. No, it's a place for instruction. It's for the person who's in charge, which is the teacher, who's supposed to be smarter than all of us, to guide me through these things I need to learn. Tell me what I need to know. And then let's do some practice and assessments on it. And hopefully I get better throughout the course of the school year. That's what I always thought teaching was. And yet somehow now we go, oh, that's, you can't teach that way. And it's like, well, does it hinder kids? Like what's getting in the way of doing that? Because not only did that not hinder me, like I went on to get 3 degrees and be a college professor for 20 years. So clearly this traditional style of the teacher being in charge of the classroom, didn't hinder my learning. It didn't, I wasn't sitting in my seat going, gee, I wish there was more inquiry-based learning. And I wish we could do more group work and more turn and talk. No, it was, you're the teacher. Teach me. Even as a small child, that's how I felt about school. So something that this gets linked with is the science of learning. And I'll talk more about this science stuff here in a minute. But I was looking up. I was like, okay, well, what's the science behind this turn and talk stuff? And so I did a quick little Google search, and the AI answer comes up first now. And so it talked about, here's some of the evidence and all this stuff. And okay, fine. I'm not disputing that this is a potential way of doing instruction. However, the examples, this is why it's so stupid, okay? So how it works. Here's what the AI told me about the science of turn and talk. In a turn and talk, a teacher provides a short, focused prompt such as, explain how photosynthesis works. Well, explain how photosynthesis, again, I already know the answer because I'm the one who's been listening to the teacher, or I read it in the textbook assignment you gave me. Why do I need to explain it to a classmate when I already know the answer? And again, if I have to explain it to him, well, that means he hasn't learned. So that's your job, teacher. You do it. You teach him. And if I already know it, I don't need him explaining it to me. So what's the point of this? This is just wasting time. You're just having us talk for the sake of talking. And again, even as an 8-year-old, I would have gone, this is a waste of time. Why are we doing this? Much less being 13, 17 years old, whatever. I mean, it's just so silly. Or another question, it says, what do you know about gardening? Again, as an 8-year-old, I would have turned to my neighbor and said, I don't know anything about gardening and I don't care about gardening. So let's just sit here for 30 seconds while the teacher waits all this out. I don't need to talk about this. And I would wait for the teacher to resume the lesson, because just getting me to talk about it doesn't help me learn about it, especially when I don't care about it. If it's a topic that I have no connection to and no interest in, why in the world would I want to have a discussion with my partner about it? Especially a kid who's nowhere near as smart as I am. So it's just so weird. And so there's more explanation how it helps with language development and, formative assessment, as if the teacher can hear 17 different conversations of the 34 kids in a class and assessing whether they're having a good conversation or not. That's ridiculous. Confidence and engagement. Quieter students gain a safe space to share ideas. Quieter students. I was a quiet student. All right. I was very shy. I wanted no part of being loud or being the center of attention. No way. I'm going to explain my wife's perspective on this here in a second. So was she. Very quiet, very reserved. Neither of us have any motivation to want to participate in this. So clearly you have no clue about how quiet students actually think and feel in a classroom. If this is what you think creates confidence and engagement, you don't know us who are quiet students. All right. So again, the science of it is, I'm not saying it's not right, but it's not as strong as you think. Another just example, use prompts tied to current investigations or concepts. How does temperature affect plant growth? Again, if we're studying this in class and you had me read a passage about it in our textbook last night, or you explained it in yesterday's lesson, I already know the answer to this. So why do I need to go explain to somebody how I know how temperature affects plant growth? And again, if I didn't know, chances are that kid probably doesn't know either. But if I did know and he knows, so we're just telling each other what we already know, what's the point of this? Now, if the teacher wants to assess my memory and comprehension by saying, okay, class, remember yesterday we talked about plant growth and how temperature affects those plants. Matt, can you remind us what we talked about yesterday? And then you put me on the spot and you have me answer it to see if I remembered from yesterday and if I comprehended the lesson, and to, put it in my own words. Okay, well, you can do that with a direct question to a student. And then you can ask another student, okay, Matt said this. Do you agree with that? Is he right about that? Is there anything he's missing? And you can add on to that. You can do it Socratically. That's way more effective than having 2 8-year-olds sit next to each other and go, okay, explain this topic to one another. Again, any kid who's reasonably smart, as I was at 8 years old, I would have said, this is dumb. Let's move this along, Mrs. Teacher, because this is wasting our time. So again, even as a kid, I knew the difference between, helpful instruction. Okay, I'm learning something new from the adult in the room, and you're just wasting time so that you don't have to teach me something, because that's what this looks like. And look, speaking of the science of it, the book Academically Adrift, which came out maybe 15 years ago, I read it several times because it was really, really good research. And even in that book, it explains that smarter students spend less time working with others. They prefer to work alone. So that's the great irony of this is, by putting kids in groups to help them become smarter, we ignore that the smart kids actually don't want to be in groups. So the smarter you make a kid get, the less he wants to be a part of a group. So again, we're like, well, what's the point of this? If you want to get kids smarter, there's other ways to do that. If you want to get kids to, lend their voices to the class or have a discussion, there's other ways to do that. But putting them in groups or having to do this pair and share and turn and talk, it just, it goes against what smart kids actually care about and want to do. And it's hard to tell what the real benefit of this is. Again, I'm not saying there isn't some benefit. You can benefit from a variety of activities in a classroom. But the goal is, as a teacher, should be, what's the best way? What's the most effective way that I can get my kids interested in this idea and that they're going to learn this topic that I think is really valuable and important? Is this the best way? Probably not. There's probably better ways you could be doing this. So you might think, oh, well, this guy, he's kind of snarky and he made a snide little comment about, not wanting to listen to the nose-picking 8-year-old next to him or whatever. But maybe it would work for other kids. So I stepped back objectively and I went to my wife without telling her any of this. I said, there's this technique, in teaching now that's kind of become prominent, which is having kids do this thing called turn and talk, where, the teacher poses a question and you have the kids talk to each other. I said, when you think back to your elementary school days, what would you have thought of that? Would you have liked an activity like that? Do you think that would have worked for you? What would you think about that idea? And she goes, no way would I want to be a part of that. So, and the thing was, and she's openly admitted, she's like, look, I wasn't that great of an elementary student. She goes, I was constantly afraid of being wrong about everything. She goes, I didn't know stuff. So putting me on the spot to try to talk to somebody else or to answer out loud in class in front of everybody, she was like, I want no part of that. And so, the fear of being wrong or those kinds of things, I know this is intended to work past that, but you have to understand that's how kids are. And so you have to guide them very specifically through these situations. You can't just say, now turn and talk, because even someone who knew the answers, I didn't want to do it. And my wife who didn't know the answers, she didn't want to do it. So who is this for exactly? All you're doing is you're making 80% of your class dislike you. And like I said in my original post, this would make me hate school. I would have hated being in classes where teachers constantly said, turn to your partner and have a discussion. Like, this is a complete turnoff. So yeah, it might work in some situations. There might be some little skill development here, but too often what's happening with these trendy ideas is teachers hear them and they hear a little science behind them and they go, oh, I have to start doing that. It's so great. And it might be okay, but there's ways we can do things better. And being a good teacher means we find things that are better, not just what's trendy. So back to my post where I said this would have made me hate school. One guy replied and he goes, interesting take. Now, this isn't a take. This is my honest belief. This is the fact of how I would have been in school. A take is an opinion. This is not my opinion. This is my reality for how I would have viewed the situation. As a student, I would have hated this. As a math teacher, I thought turn and talks were a useful tool when used with the right group of students. With the right group of students. He's exactly right. The situation isn't for everybody. All right. And if it is, it might work for everybody, but it doesn't mean it's going to be very effective for everybody. You might pull it off and kids might actually talk and whatever, but it doesn't mean there's a lot of learning going on. So he asked, was there a technique for encouraging discussion that would have made you care about what your nose-picking neighbor had to say? Or would you have preferred a way to self-select so you could talk to students who had opinions you care about? This is a genuine good faith question. Okay, like he said, it depends on the class. And again, just generally, I would never have liked this. However, as I got older, elementary school, kids aren't separated like this. But once I got to 7th grade, I started, and many schools have it was called gifted back then, gifted and talented classes where, you're grouped with the smart kids. And so you're all kind of working at the same level and you're able to think about things in similar ways. And then in high school, I was on all the honors stuff. And so, that's maybe the self-selection. Would I have liked it if I was around really smart people all the time? Maybe, but again, I can see where this doesn't really help just from a practical standpoint. Again, if I know the answer and my partner knows the answer, what's the point of us talking about it? And again, if one of us doesn't know the answer, again, because we're on similar levels, it might be more appealing to have a conversation about that. But again, as we just said, smart kids don't like this. That's what the evidence shows. And so my partner would have probably said, yeah, we don't need to talk about this. Let's just go on to the next thing. So is there a situation where I would have appreciated this method better? Maybe if I was surrounded by other smart kids. It often works, this kinds of thing, whether it's groups or just partners, works better when kids have known each other a really long time and they've been a part of some kind of strenuous process, like there's been some real team building that occurs or some shared experience. This is way more common in graduate school because, grad school is generally pretty difficult. You're studying complex things. You're writing these long papers every day. It's a grind, and your job is to talk to each other so that you can kind of go through this thing together. And again, it's not necessarily my preference, but that environment is a little more conducive to this sharing. But again, we're people with these experiences. We've gone through very difficult things together. We're all working on the exact same kinds of stuff and wrestling with these very complex things. When you're dealing with third graders or ninth graders or whoever, like they don't have that bonding shared experience. And so there's even if they've been sitting next to you for 8 months of a school year, it still, that doesn't mean they care about what their partner has to say. So this is why, whether it's the military or athletic teams or again, grad school environments where you've got these small selective groups of people who have been going through these struggles together for a long time, that's where this sharing tends to be, a bit more productive. But, is there a way that I would have liked it? Probably not. The other way you do this is, just to offer a more useful example, is having kids actually solve a problem. You don't just say, explain this to each other, talk about this, share what you think. That doesn't accomplish anything. Having a problem, a task that needs to be accomplished and that actually requires both people, especially one where you can't just have the smart person take over and do it all. Like you need both people's perspective, and maybe they each have to do part of it, and that's what comes together to build the whole thing, and then that's what you show the class. There needs to be some sort of problem to be solved. It's more like when I would do some elements of group activities in a literature class or composition class in my English study, it would be to kind of solve a mystery. Like, here's this problem that we can't quite figure out. You two each approach this from each direction, combine your personal analyses, and then synthesize it to come up with something together that's stronger, and then we'll talk about it. Like, there needs to be, again, like a mystery being solved or a project being completed, a task that you're wrestling with. It can't just be review what we learned yesterday. Or tell your partner what you think about that idea. That's just pointless. So again, I'm not saying this is the worst thing in the world. Getting kids to talk, according to them, is better than having them just sit there and stare at you. I understand that. But again, there's better ways of doing this, and resorting to just the trends and fads of turn and talk or whatever, think, pair, share, or whatever lingo we've been using for all these years. It's not as effective as you think it is. So there's an article that was on Substack just the other day. I apologize for his name, Robert Pondisio, and he was talking about this very thing. He was talking about fads and trends, and it was titled something like, "Why are there so many fads and trends in education?" And it's a good article, and I completely agree, because this is what I talk about all the time. Like, why are we renaming things? Why are we thinking that's brand new when we actually have been doing that for 40 years? Like, what's with all the trendiness here? And I was kind of thinking about it, and I think there's sort of this desire to have everything be a shortcut. Like, someone's discovered the answer, and it's way faster and easier. And so if we package it as this new thing and I put a new label on it, then that's very appealing. It gets people's attention, and they think, oh, I've got this hack for something. Just as an example, I was reading just an article the other day. The headline was something like, Gen Z are trying this trick to improve their socialization. I was like, what trick is this? And what the trick in the article was? Yeah, they're starting to put their phones down when they talk to people. Like when they go out to dinner, maybe they leave their phone, in their pocket instead of putting it on the table, or whatever. Like, it was just doing something that all of us normal people have done our whole lives, and now this is a trick. So it's the same thing. Education is filled with these hacks and these new techniques and these new labels and trends, and everything is very faddish. And it's just weird because the tried and true methods that have been going on forever actually work if they're just done properly. And I know the problem is that because things are so trendy and faddish, that everyone tries to invent something new, and there's been a lot of the new stuff that's been horrible, and so people are starting to rediscover the old stuff and think it's new, when really, no, it's just old. You just didn't know about it because you got caught up in all the other trendy stuff, like inquiry-based learning and balanced literacy and yada, yada, yada that was going on when I started my career. And many of these teachers fell for it. And so they've been doing it. And now they're discovering these other ways. And they think, oh, here's this new exciting thing called the science of reading and the science of learning. It's like, no, these are old. This was happening 40 years ago when I was a kid. So this idea isn't new. You just didn't know about it. I saw this when I was teaching, when I started my career at age 22, I was teaching elementary school. And I saw some of this new stuff and I was like, yeah, that's not going to work. I can already tell that the thing my principals in my school district wanted us to do, I was like, that's a really bad idea. I'm not doing that. And so in my classes, I didn't do it. And what do you know? My classes tend to perform better on the end of year testing than the other classes that did that stuff. So it's like, yeah, you got to be a smart enough teacher to know what works, what new ideas aren't going to work, and have the backbone to stand up and go, yeah, this new thing you're describing, that's not a good idea. I'm going to stick with the tried and true method, and that's going to work just fine. This was mostly with reading and stuff in my school, but I'm sure there's examples in other content areas as well. Another example of this, I just saw this the other day. I saw an article about guided practice. Again, like the oldest thing ever. This is not new. And so the article was very good, and I commented to the lady who wrote it, and I said, hey, this is a good article. It's useful. I mean, it's informative. I said, I'm kind of surprised that people don't know about this. Because in the article, she was like talking about her experience and explaining this to other teachers. And I was like, are there seriously other teachers out there who don't? This is common knowledge. Anyone who knows anything about teaching should already know this. And if you don't, like, what have you been doing all this time? And so, like, again, guided practice. This is what every music teacher has done forever. This is what every sports coach has done forever. You know, you demonstrate, you model something, and then you say, okay, now you try it. And the kid makes a little mistake. You go, well, let's fix that. And here's how you do it again. Let me show you. Now try it again. Okay, they get it right. Okay, let's add this other thing now. Let's do the next step of this. Nope, you're not quite there. Let me show you again. That's guided practice. Okay, there's modeling and side by side, like, monitoring of how they're doing as they work through it. The oldest technique ever. It's how granddads teach their kids to fix a car. It's how you teach a kid to shoot a free throw. It's how you learn your scales on the piano. It's basic teaching of anything in life. And yet we have teachers out there who are suddenly going, oh, this guided practice idea, this is genius. I've really got to start doing this. And I'm like,
welcome to the party, pal.
What in the world have you been doing since? Because this is common knowledge for anyone who knows anything about teaching, or just introducing a new concept to a kid. So this is something, parents, if you're watching, you have to know this, okay? There are millions of teachers out there at all levels, from kindergarten through college, millions of teachers across the country who don't know the first thing about basic teaching, okay? These are people with education degrees. Some of them have MEDs and EDDs, and they don't know the first thing about how to communicate a new idea to a kid. That should be appalling and frightening to everybody. And maybe you knew it. Maybe you have kids where you're like, I don't know if my kid's teacher is doing a great job. Trust me, they are out there and they're everywhere. If they don't know what guided practice is, if they don't know what direct instruction is, if they don't know what phonics is, like, if you don't know these things, I mean, they're everywhere. And so this is why parents need to be vigilant about checking up on what their teachers are actually teaching. And if you've encountered this and you want to get out and start homeschooling, this is why you need to learn from real expert teachers who've been doing this for 25 years and who know the best ways of guiding kids through these, whether it's new knowledge or new skills, because there are lots and lots of teachers out there who don't know anything. And then they discover this thing and they go, oh, this is going to be great. And I'm like, yeah, I was doing this, 40 years ago. This isn't hard. Why are you thinking this is a brand new idea? So that's something for parents to be very aware of. The other thing that's going on here, and this has been going on for a while, is this fascination with engagement. That's another kind of buzzword, that we've got to get kids engaged. And that's the key to teaching, is engagement. And so it's a lot of, again, the turn and talk. Well, we don't think the kid's engaged when they're sitting there listening to the teacher or reading out of their textbook. And so to get them engaged, I need them talking to their friend. And it's like, yeah, they're doing something. I don't know if they're actually engaged in the lesson, because, again, I know when I was a kid, what kids are talking about quickly devolved into some other thing. Like, what are they going to do at recess? Or, you're cracking jokes with each other. Like, you're not actually talking about the topic. So you think they're engaged, but they might not be. So this idea of engagement is pervasive in education. And really what's happening is, just to draw a parallel here, it's exactly like what I've seen for the last 20 years at churches. Okay? It's, when churches are saying we need to do better at this, we need to grow, we need to have, more Christians, obviously, or whatever the faith we're talking about. And instead of going, well, let's get better theologians in here. Let's get better theologians who are better at explaining these complex ideas of faith to people. And let's get more deep into the scripture and trying to figure out what the history is and what the theology is and what the linguistics was. Like, let's understand the text better. Let's get smarter about this. No, that's not what churches do. What do churches do? Well, let's get fog machines and let's have 20 people on stages all with a microphone. And let's have bagels and coffee out in the foyer because that's what gets people engaged. It's like, maybe, but are they learning anything? Is their faith getting any deeper? Because I thought that was kind of the point of church. It's not bagels. It's not smoke machines and light shows. So what are we doing here? And that's the exact trap that schools have come into, or teachers in classrooms have fallen into, is I got to do something that's flashy, and we got to gamify everything. And I need kids to be talking all the time. And everything has to be a show and a production and an activity and a game. And it's like, how about just teach better? Be a better teacher in explaining these things. And then you don't need to jump through all the hoops of engagement, because there's ways of engaging kids that is way simpler than what we're doing here. All right. I don't need to do a turn and talk to get my kids to be focused on me. If you know what you're doing, it's not that hard. So again, teachers are kind of wrapped up in this, the engagement question, when no, it's really about teaching content. How do you get the kids excited about the thing you're actually talking about? And, active learning and all this, like, yeah, I'm not saying those things are bad. I'm just saying you're getting distracted from what the point of all this is. And I'll talk more about that here as we keep going. Just as another metaphor, like the church, it's like if you're a restaurant that's struggling. All right, you own a restaurant, and you think, well, we need flashier advertising, and we need our hosts at the host stand to be more engaging. We need them to be way more friendly and cracking jokes and telling little stories and guiding them when they guide them to their seats, and like we need to make it more inviting and engaging. It's like maybe your chef stinks and you're using bad ingredients. Maybe it's as simple as that. Maybe you don't need it. This is why so many of the best restaurants you ever go to don't even have a sign out front. They don't have a host greeting you. It could be the ugliest. Like, I've been to some places that I walk in, I'm like, I don't know if this is safe to eat here. Turned out to be one of the greatest meals I've ever had. Why? Because it's about the chef. It's about the ingredients. It's about the food. It's not about the flashy stuff that would have engaged me. All right? Do the stuff better. The engagement tends to take care of itself. Or the little engagement you do need to do, it's actually very, very easy to do. And you don't have to spend so much time and resources on doing things that really don't matter. The things that matter at a restaurant, is the food good? Is there a really good cook back there? Is he using really good ingredients and has a cool menu? Okay, then do that. Let's focus on that. Do you have a good pastor who's great at explaining these complex topics and explaining scripture and helping us develop our faith? Or is it all just a show? Is it all just to engage me? Because the point of all this is to learn. And the engagement is only a teeny tiny step on the way to learning. And yet we spend a lot of time and energy talking about how to engage students. We're putting the emphasis in the wrong place. And so the easiest way to create initial engagement is you connect whatever you're talking about to something they already know about, or something they like, or at least have heard of. And it's something about their real life, not just some current event topic or political topic or social justice topic, but like their real life situations. And you introduce that new idea. Like we used to, when I used to teach fifth graders, I could be talking about some story, or, maybe a kid was reading a story on his own, or maybe a movie had come out or something. Like the kids would be talking about something. And, or again, we had just read something in class, and I would say, oh, you just saw that movie where like it was about revenge. And I said, there's this great story that is about this king who has been killed. He's been murdered, and his son is trying to decide what he's going to do about it. He's wrestling with the fact that his father, the king, has been killed. Should he take revenge on the person he thinks did it, or should he not? Because if he does that, could something bad happen to him? And so the story is about this prince, and he's wrestling with the death of his father, and the person who killed him is actually his own uncle. So like, how do you take revenge on your own uncle? Like what happens to your family? What happens to the kingdom if you do that? And within 30 seconds, kids will be like, oh, can we read that story? That sounds awesome. It's like, well, it's called Hamlet, and you'll read it when you're 17. You're not quite ready for it yet, but someday I hope you will read it. Like, you can get kids engaged in all sorts of stuff if you just introduce it correctly. Or, maybe we talked about a story about a family or something, and I say, there's this other really great story that's about this king, and he's got these 3 daughters, and 2 of his daughters are really not nice people. They lie all the time. They're very manipulative and sneaky. And so, they say all these really nice things to their dad, who's the king, to get him to give them parts of his kingdom. So they get, the power and the wealth that comes from ruling over the land. And he has this other daughter, though, who's super sweet and nice, and she always tells the truth. And she doesn't want to manipulate her dad like that. And so she doesn't use really over the top language and try to flatter him. And her dad actually ends up punishing her and kicking her out. And so these 2 evil sisters end up with all the rewards, and the good sister ends up getting kicked out of the family. And so the rest of the story is about the fights that go on in trying to reconcile the kingdom. And the kid's like, wow, that sounds great. What's with these crazy sisters? Why are they acting like that? I'm like, well, it's called King Lear, and you'll read that when you're in college someday or something. Like, again, you're not ready for it now, but here's something you can look forward. Like, you can get kids excited about very difficult things if you just explain it in a way that they can relate to. They've all heard of a revenge story. They've all heard of a crazy family story or someone lying and cheating. These are very easy things to do. So, when we're like, what does it take to get kids engaged? Well, tell them a 30-second little story that sounds really cool, and they'll be hooked. I promise you. You don't need to do some big activity. You don't need to play some game. You don't need to have technology involved. Just be a good teacher. It's really not that difficult. And what that little example also does is it's something that I do every time I talk to students, which is I'm constantly referring to where we were, what have we already learned, what have we already talked about. Here's where we are today. This is this new thing we're gonna talk about. But also, here's where we're going with this. Here's the new thing that this is leading to that we're going to talk about tomorrow or next week or whenever. And so, constantly framing the things you're talking about, especially when you're trying to engage them, is you just say, well, remember we talked about this yesterday, and you kind of summarize it for a second. So everyone goes, oh yeah, I remember. Yeah, we did do that. Okay, I'm on board now. Okay, so they're already starting to be engaged. You've already hooked them a little bit because you've already referenced something they just learned. And now you start talking about this new thing, and you make it sound cool, like I just did with Shakespeare. And you reference, okay, we're learning this because that's going to lead us to this next thing. Or when you're older, you're gonna talk about this, so you need to know this now because in 3 years at your next school, you're going to talk about that. So it's important. Like, you're constantly framing it as, here's where we were, here's where we are today, here's where we're going with this. And if you do that, the kids have a framework and a path forward on their learning, and that is what can spur the engagement. You don't have to make it so complicated. All right, so a few minutes ago I said that this idea of science, we put science in front of everything, and now there's a big movement on the science of reading, which is just phonics basically, and basic comprehension skills, which again have been around for 50 years, and the science of learning, and we use fancy phrasing like cognitive load theory and all this stuff. And I think what's happening, again, all that stuff is true. So I'm not bashing it. I'm not saying that stuff's wrong. You shouldn't be doing it. All of that stuff is accurate. The problem is, I think what's happening is teachers have been viewed as, well, like I just showed you at the beginning of this, there's being sort of illegitimate. Like, maybe teachers don't know as much as we think they do. Maybe they're actually wasting a lot of time in classes and not staying on topic, and they're doing these silly activities and hosting cereal and cartoon parties or whatever. Like, yeah, this is a problem. And so people are going, well, we need to make this look more legitimate. And so let's call it science. And, let's use fancy terminology, and let's use a lot of jargon like they do in the sciences or in business, or in politics or whatever, where things are very jargonized. And so it makes it look like we're doing something that's really cutting edge, and we have all these new ideas. And then people will respect us because they'll go, oh, they're not just teaching third graders, they're doing scientific work here. It's like, yeah, again, that's all useful. But again, it gets us caught up in this trap of being kind of enamored by shiny things even if the shiny thing is actually very valuable, it can get us to follow trends, which is a bit dangerous because trends change. But it also neglects a really important part of teaching, and this is something that is going to be a bit controversial, and I'm going to try to explain it the best I can. But there's not just a science to teaching, there is an art to teaching, all right? And so I know that's discouraging to people because when we frame it as a science, then it's just a methodology. Well, anybody can do this. Just follow the steps. Make sure you write your lesson plan like this, and the kids will learn. It's science. And it's like, maybe, but actually there's a lot of teaching that's based on feel, that's adaptability and flexibility, and you got to do stuff on the fly based on what your kids need. There is an art to this. And this is something that, again, I kind of have just naturally been able to do. And so, I don't need a formal lesson plan I've said this on other episodes or lectures I've given, like, I don't need to follow a lesson plan line by line. And when I have teachers come visit me, because teachers a lot of times wanted to come watch my classes because they knew I was doing things that were very successful. And they would go, wow, that was so organized. I loved how you led them from this to this. How'd you do that? And I was like, well, I pay attention to what the kids need in that moment. And I kind of make sure that I'm adaptable and flexible, and I have an end goal in mind, and I can figure out a way to get to that end goal no matter which direction the kids want to go. And they're like, oh, wow. They thought I had like some super organized thing. It's like, no, I kind of feel my way through this. And so that's discouraging, because when you say something is an art, either it becomes too difficult for other people to do, or it becomes this idea that's like something's inherent, like it's an innate thing that you either can do it or you can't. And I do sort of believe that to a degree, that there are just simply good teachers and there are simply bad teachers. But this is something that can be practiced. And, even though I could do it from the start when I was 22, I obviously got a lot better at it the longer I did it. And so after 25 years, yeah, it's no problem. I can walk into any class and teach anything off the top of my head, because I've been doing this so many times that I know how all this goes. And I know, and I'm confident enough that no matter what a kid says, I can use that to guide them on the path I need them to go. And so I don't have to have everything written out. I don't need to follow the science of it, even though I actually am using science and how I'm explaining things and how I'm helping the kids process this new information. But it doesn't have to be so scientific. And like, I saw this when I was in school, in my undergrad as an education major, and I would be in these classes, and we always give sample lessons. And so you get up and you do your practice lesson, whatever. And I would know these, they'd be people who were very, very smart students. And it was usually girls. I was always around girls because that's who's in education. And I'd see this really smart girl get up and give a lesson, and I'd just be sitting there going, that's just not going to work. Like, even I can tell that a fourth grader is not going to care about what you're discussing. And she would have everything written out nicely according to what the teacher wanted, and the beautiful lesson plan and the objectives. And then I'm going to ask this question, and then we're going to follow up with this activity, and it would all be planned out beautifully. And I could just tell a guy, yeah, that's not going to work. Like, the way you're explaining that, no kid is going to care about that. And, maybe they thought that about what I taught too. I don't know. But, when I would teach for my many years, the things I do seem to work pretty well. And the same thing happens at the older level. So I saw it in school, but I also saw it when I would sit in professional development meetings, or I'd go observe other teachers, because as a department chair, I'd have to go observe people all the time. And I'd sit there and I'd go, you're a professional at this. I know you know what you're doing as far as organizing a class, but what you're doing just isn't working. Like, I'm observing a class, and I'm like, can't you tell the class is not with you right now? And yet you're following your steps. You're doing the science. But again, there's an art to it. There's a feel to it that you kind of just have to be able to do, but also you just have to practice way more at this. And so we have to, I don't know exactly how we do this, but we have to get students in our teacher prep programs, or even if they already are teachers and you do this in professional development, like, maybe we should be practicing this even with teachers who have experience, where we take away the crutch of the specific lesson plan, and we separate them from the methodical science of it all. And we say, here's a topic, teach us, go. And if you can't do that, well, you don't really have the artistic element of teaching prepared yet. And so, again, that's just one option for how we could maybe improve this process of teaching. But we have to do better at this, because otherwise we're just always enamored by the next thing, the next science of thing. And a lot of it is rooted in, I think one of the reasons teachers struggle with this, and again, they're just following these very technical procedures, is we become obsessed with skills. And so there's teachers, again, this was what my school wanted me to do. And I basically abandoned it. I was like, I'm not doing that because that's dumb and it isn't working for my kids. Where, there's kind of a checklist like, okay, on Monday, you and your kids, you need to talk about this reading skill, whatever, context clues, or it's something, being able to compare, contrast texts, whatever the thing is, it's a skill. And because it's part of the state standards. And so the teachers end up going, well, I need to teach this skill. And so I'll pick any resource where I can just implement the skill. And that's what I talked about the other day on the episode regarding that Ray Bradbury story. Was like the teacher was doing a fine job, but basically he was just using that story as a prop to teach these skills. It's like, you're missing the point of this, dude. The point is, this is a really cool story. Focus on the story. While you do that, you can incorporate some of these skills that, yes, students probably need to be learning. But the point of this class is not the skill, or the lesson is not the skill. The point is, you need to appreciate what this is. In this case, it was a piece of literature, but maybe it's a discussion about a historical event. Maybe it's a scientific concept, whatever it is. But like, let's appreciate that first, and let's analyze why that's really cool and interesting and applicable to our lives. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to smuggle in a few little skills here that show that you're able to learn the content right now, but you're also able to then hopefully apply this into some other piece of content later on. But that's what you do. You focus on the thing. And too often we're going, well, today I need to teach, standard 5.3a from the state standards. And so that's what we're going to do. Like, but it's a waste of time. It's a turnoff for kids. It's not engaging. And you're making education, again, like a big checklist. Like, okay, we got to do this, and then we got to do this on Thursday. And like, how about focus on the material? Be an expert in the material first. And then once you know the material and you find out what's so great about it, well, then you can communicate those things to the kids, and then they'll be much more receptive to it. I've debated with education professors a bit over my many years, because I've been at schools where, education people have to take 40 hours of education. And I'm like, they don't need that much. Teaching school it's just not that difficult. I think, and many schools did go to this, which is great, where it's like, no, teaching is like an 18 credit thing where you study your subject area and then you study teaching for a little while, but you have to be an expert in your subject area, or at least quite competent. So you take your 40 hours in that, and then the teaching part is a supplement to that. Instead, what many schools still do, sadly, is no, you're going to be a teacher, so you need to take 40 hours of this. And then if you're going to be a science teacher, you only need to take 18 hours of science. It's like, no, you have it backwards. We need kids who are going to be science teachers, experts in science. And then we'll teach them the teaching stuff alongside. But they think, oh, I've got to have all this pedagogy, and we've got to have all these theories, and it's all about crafting curriculum and all this stuff. It's like, man, this is not hard, okay? Trust me, a few courses where you practice this stuff, and you've got it, all right? You don't need 40 credit hours of this. What we need are people who are experts in content. Now, I know that's trickier at the elementary level, and so I'm maybe not necessarily talking about them, because those teachers have to teach all the subjects, and so you can't necessarily take 40 hours of all of them. But especially once you get towards middle school and high school, we need to do away with the 40 hours of education courses, pedagogy courses, and they need to be content courses. I'm a big fan of E.D. Hirsch because he's a knowledge guy. And, I can't remember what book it's in, but he explicitly says, the difference between an expert teacher and a mediocre teacher is how much content knowledge the teacher has. That's the difference. You're either an expert in this thing or you're mediocre, because the more you know about it, the more ways you can explain stuff. If you don't know a lot about it, you might have one way of explaining it, but if the kids don't get it, you're going, I don't know how else to tell you this. Well, someone who's really smart about that thing, science, literature, whatever it is, well, you can explain it in 50 different ways. And so if you don't like this one, okay, here's another angle. Oh, you're still confused? Here's another angle. None of that worked. I'll try tomorrow with something else. Like, the person who has the knowledge is the better teacher. Now, I know everyone's going to be like, that's not true. I had a math professor in college who was a genius, and yet he couldn't explain these things to me. It's like, I understand. There are exceptions where, yes, someone's super smart and they don't know how to explain stuff. But generally speaking, for most situations in education, the person who knows the most is usually the best teacher. That's just how it is. That's the facts of the case. So we need to just move away from the constant engagement stuff and get to the heart of what it is you actually want kids to know. And then you either guide them to that or just flat out tell them here's what you need to know. All right. And again, it's crazy the last several years where people are like just discovering this direct instruction and explicit instruction stuff. Where it's like, why aren't you just telling the kids the answers? This is what you should be doing. Just tell them and then explain it so they understand it. But yeah, you having kids just try to wrestle with it and figure stuff out on their own, like that's so hard and not that useful. Again, if I were a kid, I would sit there and go, why don't you just tell me the answer? Because that would be faster and then I would know it and I'll jot it down so I remember it, and you can quiz me on it tomorrow so I'll remember it more. Like, just give me the information. It's so weird. Again, the idea of like, what are we doing this for? I remember being in classes, even as a little kid, where maybe a teacher would want us to color something, like a map or something. And I even remember as a small kid going, why am I doing this? Why do I need to color this? Do you want me to remember which country is which or which state is which? Well, I can do that. I don't need to color them to do that. I know that, New Jersey is over here and Oregon is over here. I don't need to color code things. I know that Russia is here and Spain is here. I don't need colors for all this. So what's the point of this? Well, it was an activity. It was that the teacher thought it would be fun to have little kids color things. And I would be as a kid going, this is pointless. Just what information are you trying to give me? What do I need to learn here? Because if you want me to know something, just tell it to me. But, the idea of just having kids do stuff and calling it active learning or engagement, that's not as useful as you think it is. Or if you want the class to wrestle through something, okay, well let's all do that together. You ask really good questions. We'll venture some answers. You'll correct us. We'll keep moving along to see if we can figure this out. But the teacher should be directing that and guiding it. Having me sit here and color something, that's not helping me learn anything. So what's the point of this? So it's always about learning. And even as a small kid, I knew what busy work was. Whether it was a homework assignment, whether it was an in-class assignment, whether it was a group activity, whether it was a turn and talk, or something like that. That didn't really exist back then, but something with a partner or whatever. Yeah, I know this is busy work. You're just having us do stuff. This isn't about me learning anything. So let's move this along. So I think this probably has occurred because I think we're in this doom loop where we're just this horrible feedback cycle where this happened back when I was a kid too with television, and Neil Postman wrote about this. Is what the book Amusing Ourselves to Death is about, where the fear was, and it was a valid one, that having things on screens, everything being televised, is going to change how we view the world, and therefore we're going to expect that to be normal. And in that book, it's about how it was replacing print culture, and so we're going to be more engaged with watching TV shows instead of reading books and articles and newspapers, etc. And so I think that's kind of where this started, because then it all got supercharged once the internet came along, and then again when smartphones came along, and now everyone's got screens in their pockets. And so we had this problem where we thought as teachers, or just anyone else who's observing the culture, would say, oh, this is what people are engaged in now. They're engaged in this technology, these screens, these television, everything being televised or things being computerized, everything's digital. And so that's what's taking kids' attention away. So we've got to crank up the engagement because that's what we're competing with. It's like, okay, so that's what we tried to do. And then the technology, though, the digital stuff just kept getting more advanced. Like I said, it goes to smartphones and internet access and on-demand video and everything else that's at our fingertips and it's in our pocket. And so all along the way, we're going, oh, well, this is what we're up against. We've got to make it more engaging. And then the technology advanced. We go, we're losing engagement. We got to engage more. And so everything is just this arms race of engagement and having to have everything be an activity. And that learning should be fun, and we should be playing games, and everything should be, I should be the cool teacher. And we're getting past what real learning is. And so the science part is starting, the science of learning people are on the right track. That is the right path. But again, even within that, there are better ways of doing things. And again, we need to just be very aware. The science stuff is not new. This is old stuff. We've known how the brain works forever, and we've known just how teaching works. Like I said, whenever you teach a kid to play an instrument, start a sport, fix their bike, like it's all the same. And yet teachers think they have to reinvent the wheel all the time. So I don't know why that is, but I think that's probably where it started. This fascination with engagement was because, you think you're competing with maybe the other areas of their life, but especially things that are on screens. And just a little hint for everybody, you're never going to win that battle. So, don't fight battles you can't win. I'm never going to be as entertaining as whatever cartoon they're watching on their iPad. So I'm not going to fight with that. I'm going to do something that's different, and I'm going to apply it to their education. But this is the hole that teachers have dug for themselves. It's like, I've got to be entertaining. I've got to have a game. I've got to be engaging. And yeah, it's just not helping the way you think it is. So enough doom and gloom, enough criticism. What's the answer? And I don't really know. The thing that I keep coming back to is kind of what I mentioned before. We have to focus on the thing being the thing. All right. Not using materials as props for something else. Susan Sontag has a quote that says something like, a thing is a thing, not what is said of that thing. And she was applying that to criticism. Like, a piece of art should stand alone as a piece of art. We shouldn't view that piece of art based on what some art critic wrote about it. All right. The opinions, people are allowed to have their opinions, and we actually do need critics. But if you want to appreciate that piece of art, then appreciate it. If you want to disagree with that critic, that's totally fine. Don't let people influence you on what you might find valuable. If you like it, if there's something that you find appealing, great. Then let the piece of art stand for itself. Don't worry about what the critics have said about it. And I think the same thing happens in education, where we use these materials, in my case, literature, let's say, again, as props for me to do some other task. All right. So in graduate school, it's, well, we're going to study this book because I want to shoehorn in my feminist theory, or I want to really have a discussion about post-structuralism. So therefore, I'm going to pick this text as an example. It's like, how about we just look at the text as being a great text? That might be more helpful. Then along the way, you can say, well, here's an element where it actually exhibits some post-structural elements, or here's a character who's sort of aligned with some of the feminist theory. Okay, you can talk about that stuff as you go. But I think too many teachers, they think, I've got to get to these skills. I've got to cover these standards. And then they just use the material, again, whether it's a piece of history, a piece of literature, some science thing, whatever. And you're just using it to teach the thing. And the kids know what's going on, and they're not interested in that. What's way more interesting, kind of like I discussed with how I would talk about Shakespeare with my 10-year-olds, is you focus on the thing itself. Like, you discuss how cool this scientific concept is. You discuss how cool this battle from the Civil War was. You discuss how great this piece of literature is and what these characters are doing and this fight they're having and this moral dilemma that they're wrestling with. Yeah, the thing itself is cool. If it's not cool, then you're in the wrong profession, because hopefully you became a teacher because you find things cool. I find books cool. That's why I became an English teacher. If you're a history person, you find the movements and evolution of time and history and those events and those people that have participated in it, you find that really cool. And so that's what you want to teach the kids. Instead of using these cool things as just a prop for engagement, or because I just need to cover a standard, or I'm going to use it in an activity. Doesn't matter if I'm actually learning from it, but I did an activity with it. Like, well, you're wasting a lot of people's time, and it's not true learning. Or if there is learning, it's happening accidentally, or it's happening at a pretty low level where maybe they get it and then they might forget it. And they go, oh, that was fun that one day, but I don't really remember what that book was about, or what was that historical figure we were trying to talk about? I remember the activity, but I don't remember the thing. Yeah, that's what happens, is when you focus on the fun, oftentimes the message, the real point of all of it, which is, here's how cool this is. Here's how this is applicable to your life. Here's how this shaped our city, our country. Here's how this influenced all of Europe, or whatever you're talking about. Focus on the thing. Let the thing be the thing. Don't use it for engagement. Don't use it for an activity. Just focus on explaining that thing and getting students excited about it as a thing. And you're halfway there. You're halfway there to being a good teacher. And then, yes, there's some methodology involved, and there's some technique in moving kids from one idea to a new idea. But, instead of being obsessed with engagement, Be obsessed with how cool it is that you get to do this thing every single day. Where, wow, I get to read Othello today. I love this play. I cannot wait to talk to my students about it because they're going to get a kick out of it because this story is wild. Well, that's how I approach teaching. If that's not what you do, then maybe teaching isn't for you. Or I feel bad for your students because they can see through the gimmicks. They can see through the fads and the trends. And they go, I think my teacher's just having us do busy work right now because he thinks this is a fun activity, but I'm not actually learning anything. I think my teacher is just having us talk to each other because he doesn't want to talk to us anymore. I don't know what we're supposed to be learning from this turn and talk. That's what happens, all right? Yeah, smarter kids get it earlier than other kids, but eventually all the kids know what you're doing. So be the expert in the room. Tell them what they need to know. Guide them from one thing they need to know to the next thing they need to know. But and make it applicable to their lives. Even if it's something happened 200 years ago, here's how this affects you. You should really know this. That's the engagement. It's not hard. I don't know why we become so enamored with all this stuff. But again, I think it's because we're so desperate to legitimize what we do. We don't want to be seen as being frivolous or less valuable to the culture. And I understand that, but like we as teachers, if we just do a better job, then we don't need to keep trying to legitimize ourselves by using all this jargon and fancy techniques. Just be good at this, and your students will enjoy it. Or even if they don't enjoy it, they'll learn from it. I promise you. So let's all do better at this. Let's stop being obsessed with all the jargon. Seek out good teachers. And what I'm doing as I've been talking about the last two posts on my Substack, I'm showing people how you do this. So all the things that I'm describing here, I'm making lessons so you can see how I actually do it for people. So it's not just an abstraction where it's this thing that's like, oh, here's what I need to do. No, I'm showing you in real time how you do it. And this is generally what works. So I'm trying to help you along if you need it. But teaching isn't as hard as people think it is. And everyone can be better. So let's keep improving on that. And let's keep focusing on getting kids to be not just smarter people, not just more educated from a standards standpoint, from, I need to cover this because my state testing is next week, but that they'll actually find this relevant to their lives and for being a human being and for living in a culture. And that's what real education is. Thanks for watching. See you next time.